Hello, everybody. Hello once again, and welcome to SDVoE Live. I'm your host, Justin Kennington, and this is TV for Pro AV. Once again, we have a very special and I think interesting episode for you today. Our guest is my old friend, Josh Srago, who has taken what I think is one of the more interesting career paths in Pro AV. I'll let him tell you a little more about that later. But today we're going to focus our discussion on the areas of network security, but also privacy. Right? Network security quickly comes to your mind when you think of AV over IP and some of the other technologies on the network that we use in AV. But what's the point of security? It really is privacy, and a lot of that is driven by behaviors and actions rather than technology. So let me not spoil our thunder. We'll talk about that a lot with Josh later. Thanks for joining us. Those of you who are watching this in the SDVoE Academy, look right down below my feet, way down there, and you'll find our chat function, so you can chat with everyone else who's watching the show live. We are broadcasting live on YouTube and live on Twitter. And those of you who are watching us on those platforms, if you would like, you will find a QR code. I think they're going to put it in that corner. Watch for that as it pops up during the show, and you'll be able to point your phone at that and join us in the chat inside the SDVoE Academy while you watch us on your other platforms. So look for that. Because after today's show, we will have our after show. That is where we will sit down, take a little break, and my co-host Matt and I and our guest Josh will interact directly with you. So you can bring your questions, your comments, and tell us what you think about the show. We're going to go to a quick quiz question before we throw it over to Matt, who will be in our education studio and going to tell you a little bit about some of the network security features you should demand from your AV over IP system. So watch for the quiz because there's big prizes if you get the answers right.
Hi guys, good to see you again. Matt here, your favourite English guy. Great show today. Security and privacy feature requirements of an AV over IP system. You know, we need to think really hard about prioritising these essential basic security elements before we even start thinking about features of a system. And more to that, making the consumer and the customers aware of exactly why the tech is there and how it's being used. So Josh is really going to help us with that. But before we do that, let's take a look at this this new course that's on Academy. It's a snippet, and you'll be able to go and watch the course yourselves after the show. But here's a little snippet of what to expect. Enjoy.
Networks are everywhere, and as a hacker, I'm extremely busy trying to find those which are weak in their security and privacy. They are out there, and when I find them, I make sure I steal every piece of personal and protected data that I can find.
It can be really easy to choose an AV over IP system based on the cool feature sets it offers. However, what's more important is understanding how well protected the content which is being sent across the network is. Let's use the car industry as an example. Over the decades, the consumer has been instrumental in making sure the safety of car manufacturers meets a minimum requirement. So much so that whenever we buy a new car today, we automatically expect that car to meet a minimum standard of safety without needing to research it first. Consumer demands are key to pushing manufacturers to meet standards. So, by making sure we are all aware of those minimum standards from an AV over IP perspective, we can really push the manufacturers of those systems to meet our basic security and privacy standards before any other features are considered. Before any other features are considered, it's completely non-negotiable that your AV over IP system has the following 3 security measures in place: encryption, authentication, and vulnerability scanning. Without any of these, your AV and control data is wide open to theft, This course will help you to demonstrate the security parameters of your AV over IP installation to IT professionals by explaining these basic security and privacy features to ensure your data doesn't end up going to places or people it shouldn't. Let's begin with the question why. Why do we need to implement basic security measures to networks? Okay, let's rephrase that question. Why do we lock our houses before we go out to work? The answer to this, of course, is the same for both questions.
It stops the thieves stealing your personal things.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. Yes, you're absolutely right. Let's just lock the door here. Security touches everyone, whether we're protecting our personal possessions from the hands of thieves or protecting data streams from going to places they shouldn't. Basic security and privacy mechanisms need to be put into place. Hello, how are you?
Hello, Matt. Good to see you.
Oh, it's good to see you too. How's things?
Good. That was a great piece. I don't know if I like the hacker better or all the car crashes, but very attention grabbing. That's for sure.
Indeed, and when you're doing that, when I was doing that hacker piece, it just got scarier and scarier every time I was adding more overlay of the voice, and it's horrible to watch. But hey, we've got to get the point across, right?
That's it.
Great show planned. Looking forward to this. We're making a real point that these basic security and privacy measures have really got to be thought about by everybody before feature sets are thought about. We use the car analogy. Do you like that?
I do. I think the point made in the video is exactly it. We don't really. There are people who think first about a car's safety, and that's what they're going to prioritize, and they're going to shop based on that. But there are many people who don't. They think about, how fast does it accelerate? How much technology does it have in it?
You got it.
And they can do that because we have demanded of the car industry that the baseline, that the most unsafe vehicle in production is still really very safe.
You got it.
And I think that's the place that we have to get to in AV is to demand that, so that we can know that all AV systems are safe and secure, and then we can worry about who's got the most interesting feature set.
Absolutely right. And on that note, let's head into more of an AV piece with the news. So, item number one. That's two really good items you've picked here, Justin. But item number one, I love these. I've got my own thoughts, but let me hand it to you first. What was your take on this piece?
So the piece described sort of the question of how do we manage the information that can be and is captured by many digital signage systems today, right? Some of these kiosks have cameras built in. These days they have temperature checks built in. So they are capable of capturing private data, right? Facial recognition or matching your face to your temperature. And the question then becomes, how do we treat that data sensitively? What I took away from the article is almost, I don't want to say scary, because I don't want that to be our theme today, but everyone who was interviewed in the article kind of said, well, the end user, the owner of this technology, should work with their system integrator to come up with a clear and transparent privacy policy that protects individual users. And I thought to myself, wow, on the one hand, I agree with that, but on the one hand, how do you even communicate a privacy policy when we're talking about public installations, right? If this is a kiosk at the shopping mall, where and how am I as a user going to even receive this notice of privacy rights? There's a lot of big challenges here. This is something I wanted to talk about with Josh too. Anything you took away?
Yeah, so very much the same. The word transparency kind of went across both of these news pieces that we're going to be talking about, but definitely the public, by and large, is not aware of how the tech is being used, and it's this privacy policy that's actually very important to everybody, because that privacy policy needs to reflect exactly what's happening to the information that the tech is gathering. And I think one other point I took away from this was that consumers aren't aware necessarily, and they realise that there's cameras in the room, microphones in the room, there's things in the room, and they start to create this drama about, oh my God, I don't want to be in here because all my information's been taken away and used for nefarious purposes. When in actual fact, that's not the reason. You know, it's there for a very good reason, which is explained very clearly in the privacy policy. So I think as we start,
17-page document.
Yeah, so as we really start to get the consumers and aware of the privacy policy, and the privacy policy itself reflecting exactly what's happening, when we get that realization, I think we're going to be in a better place. So in item number 2, again on the piece of privacy concerns, Scott Tyner, who wrote this, he writes some fantastic stuff. He's very up to speed with IT and AV. I mean, he's very well educated, but also he works in an educational facility, so he's seeing this firsthand. And they're using tech in their various classrooms and areas around the building for a completely honest reason, for want of a better description, to monitor attendance and help them to drive the right education in these rooms and who's coming to it. But there's a concern, of course, that the tech could again be used to snoop. And Scott makes a really good point, when he says, the mobile phone has been around a long time and people would use that to snoop. If somebody wants to listen into what's going on, you can set your phone on record and listen into that. So his concern is, how do we give the consumer back control of how they can actually stop the tech in the room from recording them, or the video or the audio? Give the control back to the consumer, but not make it almost seem like, here, you can stop the tech that's happening. But obviously if they do that, there's a reason that they've done it. So it's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one. What about you? What was your takeaway?
Well, the main takeaway, the thing that I snuck in here, is that piece was 6 years old. And the real reason I put it in here is for those of you, click the resource link below to read the details, is to think about, have we actually made any progress since 6 years ago when Scott laid out these challenges? And the challenges are good ones. He says, I like to put a button on my control panel for the user that says, stop in privacy mode, stop all the cameras, stop all the microphones, give me technical privacy in here. But then you have an education problem, right? How do you make sure that the user even knows that button exists, and remind them to be sure and use it when they're entering that sensitive area of their conversation, right? And the flip side, he said, well, you can also make the cameras opt in, so that you have to push a button that says, I'm going to turn on the potentially snooping technology in this classroom. Without that, it's definitely off.
Right.
But then how do you make sure that button gets opted out at the end of class?
Exactly.
So pushing that burden back onto the users is a valid thing to explore, but brings its own kinds of problems too.
And it goes back to the whole point about transparency. It's certainly the point we're making here is that we need to be really fully aware, not only as tech and AV integrators and AV designers, but we also need to really help and support our audiences to be fully aware of the sort of tech that's in the place, what it's being used for, and more importantly, how the information is being captured and what that's being used for as well. So some great pieces there. So as we move on, it's time to introduce our guest. Who's this guy?
This is Josh Srago. I repeatedly insist on calling him the JD for AV. I haven't gotten a clear answer from him whether he likes that title or not. But we'll hear a little bit very quickly about what that means and how he got here and why he wants to talk about security and privacy.
Okay, should we bring him in?
Let's do it.
And here he is. Hello, Josh.
Hi, Matt.
Hello
Hey,
and
Justin.
welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's good to see you too.
So I've been teasing everyone out there that you've had this interesting career trajectory. Why don't you tell us what that is behind your head there, and how you got to this point? Where are you now, and why?
I've told my story a lot in terms of my career in the AV industry. I've worked on all sides of the table. I've been facilities manager. I've been a manufacturer's rep. I've been a contractor, and I've been a consultant. And really, the big change for me was when I decided that we needed a voice when it came to policy decisions that were, and the way the world was changing, and I saw how policy decisions were going to affect things. And that started in 2014 with an appellate court decision in DC, Verizon versus the FCC, when they sued. Verizon sued the FCC over the practice of what they were trying to implement at the time on net neutrality laws. And shortly after that, then FCC Chairman Wheeler tried to implement a fast lane idea where larger companies could purchase or isolate themselves and say, hey, we have priority on this network and we're going to take this much bandwidth to ourselves. Well, AV at that time, if you recall, was moving into 4K, and I started thinking about that of like, okay, so at 5 p.m., all of my clients are going to be allocated on 4K video down to just a small partition of the network because the rest of the world is going home to watch YouTube, Netflix, and Hulu. And now you look at how many streaming services we have and how dangerous that could have been if fast lanes had been implemented. And that was kind of what led me to it. And that in turn led to looking into privacy implications and hacking violations and what the laws were on cybersecurity. And that's how I ended up at Santa Clara. And I just finished my JD in December, so I actually finished a semester early. And now I'm just looking for someone to hire me and pay me to do this kind of work.
Well, I was going to say I'd be happy to hire you. SDVoE Alliance relies on a lot of pro bono work, so maybe I'm not helping you yet. But look for it as we expand our audience here. I kind of teased it in the opening, and it's a phraseology that you taught me and put into my head that security is really privacy and privacy is really behavior. Can you talk about that sort of privacy stack as I've just named it now?
Certainly. So one of the examples I used to give when I was talking about this in person back in olden days is room scheduling systems is a great example of this. So you think about a room scheduling system where you have a panel on the door and it's connected to a centralized system, and that centralized system, the control system, connects to your calendars in some way. Well, let's say your system gets hacked, or an individual loses their phone, or somehow somebody gets access to what these calendars are. Well, basically what happens now is they know where your appointments are and who's in the room. Translating this back to a room scheduling system, the room scheduling system is provided by a manufacturer. If that manufacturer has, in their end user license agreement, allowed themselves access to monitor who's in the room at a given time, they can start to see what business arrangements are going to happen. And you can start to say, so one of the examples I used to give is like, let's say the room scheduling system at Samsung got hacked while they were in negotiations with Harman back when they purchased Harman a few years back. So it was the idea of, well, if you were the provider of that room scheduling system and you were giving yourself access to know who was in that room because you were monitoring the calendar, you could see the behavior that the company was going, and you could start to make strategic moves based on what was going to happen there. Alternatively, one of the other options is that if you're an individual and you're just sharing your information and somebody is targeting you, they can see what office you're going to be in on a given day. So let's say you only go into the office a week. They can start to monitor your behavioral patterns of, okay, well, when are they logging in from this specific IP address? When are they to their Zoom rooms from this location versus this location? And you start to see, so they know where you are and they start to be able to follow you around So making sure that you can prevent that access and making sure that you can anonymize that data. And you and Matt were both hitting on this really, or you were sort of dancing around the edge of it with the discussion of the last article, which is data management. And it becomes looking at specifically what access to data do you actually need? Do you need everything? Or do you just need a small piece of data? How long are you keeping it? How long are you storing that information, and who has access to it? And then when are you deleting it? And what access and controls are you giving to users to determine, do they get to say they don't want you to have that data anymore? Do they have to opt in? Do they have to opt out? What is your default parameters, and what's the structure you put in place to prevent that information?
Whose job should it be to answer those questions? You know, and I'm thinking, is this down to 100% the end user, that corporation or that university and their policies? Is it down to, you know, a system integrator or designer working with them to establish this? Or, and I know in some cases it already is this down to government and legislation that needs to dictate this? What's your view?
Everybody has to play a part. The end user their job isn't to understand what this technology does, how it works, and how it operates. That's the contractor. So the contractor has to be able to explain to them, as the expert that they've hired, that this is how the system works, this is the information it's tracking, we can't control this, here's what the end user license agreement says that manufacturer is going to have access to. Are you comfortable with this? And make sure that they understand that and explain that to the end user. If the end user isn't comfortable with it, then they need to make different decisions, and you need to help them make those decisions as the contractor or the consultant at a given time. Policy, of course, comes into play. The California Consumer Privacy Act, and soon the CCPA, and now soon to be the CPRA in a couple of years, because we just updated the California privacy laws on the last election, has specific requirements for users being able to contact companies and say, do you have information about me? What information about me do you have? And I want you to get rid of certain pieces of information. I've been following a story right now specifically about Clubhouse. Clubhouse blew up during the pandemic and was really popular. However, I already know Clubhouse has information on me, but I don't have a Clubhouse account. And the reason I know that they have information about me is because they are able to, when you sign up for an account, if, let's say, Justin, if you were to do it, when you did it, they got access to your entire contacts list on your phone. So that means that you having my phone number means they now have my phone number. I didn't consent to that. You consented to that for me. So there's that personal responsibility as well of the end users of saying, what am I comfortable with? The company, whoever's going to provide the technology, needs to be able to explain that arrangement between the two things. And then the government plays a role in making sure that individuals have a right of protection and a right of privacy that's enforced, and people that are advocating on their behalf.
Right. It gets vastly complicated very quickly, doesn't it? Another thing I want to touch on, and I'm gonna push it to the after show because we're out of time right now, is how do we communicate these things effectively to that end user? Right, to the Josh who's not a member of Treehouse or Clubhouse, to the person who's just walking by a kiosk in the mall and possibly having their photo taken. How in the world do we communicate this to them in an effective way? And pause right there, because we're gonna break, and I'll see you at the after show to talk about that.
Oh, I'll have to.
Wow. Wow. I'm really looking forward to the after show because Josh is so interesting.
And I'm thinking, how did we try and cram this into a 30-minute show? That's all I'm thinking.
Absolutely. Some housekeeping, JK, if you
Tune in
wouldn't
next
mind.
week for part 2. Go ahead.
There's some housekeeping.
Go ahead. Yeah, any of you watching this on YouTube, after the fact, perhaps. We make this show live, but it's available on demand. Look below in the YouTube description, and you'll see a link to that after show. Because that won't be available on YouTube, but you can log in to the SDVoE Academy and see it. I think it's going to be an interesting one this week, so be sure to check that out. Also, we should announce the questions. We're going to talk about those. You know what? Let's talk about these now, because I think we got stuff to do in the after show.
Sure.
AES. Do we have any? Oh, I don't want to get into. Do we have any answers in front of you?
Yes, we've got answers. Yeah, and it's unanimous. You know, people are saying C, so that's good. We're talking to the right crowd.
Slobber. Good. Any comment on that second question? Where should you have authentication in your AV over IP system links?
We're a bit naughty here because, in actual fact, all of these answers are correct. So we do have, people are picking answers out. But in actual fact, every single step requires authentication. So, sorry, we're a bit cheeky, but yes, they're all in fact correct. I know. Sorry about that.
Right. Well done.
So, well done to everyone that answered that. Please dial in. Please, sorry, not dial in. You're already dialed in. What are we talking about? Give us your chat. Give us your questions for Josh for the after show. I think it's going to be a pretty hot topic, this one. So get them in now, and I'll be here to throw those questions at these guys. Hashtag SDVoE Live for anyone watching on Twitter and want to send us a tweet. Please do. Very important. Isn't that right, JK? Very, very important.
Critically important. You must hashtag us on Twitter, or you will not be invited to next week's show.
Nightmare. And talking of the 2 weeks show, sorry to correct you there, but
I always say next week. I know it's every 2 weeks, and I always say next week's show. I'm just anxious to get there. You know what I mean? It's going to be exciting.
Talk to us. What's it about?
Well, this one's called Practice What You Preach. Our dear friend of the show, Tim Albright of AV Nation fame, is going to join us, and we're going to pull back the curtain a little bit and show you how SDVoE Live is produced, talk to Tim about how many of his shows are produced, and hopefully give you a little education on how to make the most of your presentation skills, right? How to make sure that you're addressing your clients, customers, and colleagues with the biggest impact possible, especially in a world where travel is limited, where in-person contact is limited. We want to help you be impactful in your communications. And that's what this show is about.
Something very close to my heart, of course. So I'm really looking forward to the next time, because I shall have something useful to share with you. But yeah, we'll show you what happens behind the scenes. And there's some really simple tricks and techniques that you guys can use actually to really elevate your pitch and make it work. You know, we've all heard of the expression, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. So we're going to help you to fathom out and figure out how you can really elevate that first pitch. But in the meantime, right now for the show, stay where you are, bring your chat to bring your questions in. But Justin, we got to head off to the after show, and we'll see you guys very, very shortly.